Hello, 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 hello. All right, this is gonna be part two of the response to Joel and Antonia's video on we could put it as how people critique MBTI in a way that's frankly unjust and not very exacting or perceptive. So you can watch part one, which is a bit over 11 minutes. It cut short because my laptop battery was low. So with that, I'll just start right now by screen sharing, and we'll continue. Right, so happy with this. Excellent. All right. Let me get this big, actually. Excellent. Antonia is so happy. She's so beautiful. You can see the kindness in her eyes. So yeah, anyway, let's continue.
You like.
Tired of settling for therapists that don't click? I was too.
That's funny. Started right on commercial. All right, let's continue.
For a living.
Yeah.
Right? Like this feels more real than what you do, but for some reason that's legit and this isn't. I don't understand that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, quick recap. Previous one, the critique is that MBTI is fiction, pseudo empirical inquiry, which some people may mean by science, or pseudo introspection that you can kind of like standardize or gather as like information. I don't know, like there are different ways to seek knowledge, and that's the problem with calling things unscientific or scientific. You have to set out the methods for what qualifies as knowing, or rather to qualify a knowing, which starts with your epistemology of how you do know. And all science starts with epistemology, which is the branch of wisdom seeking, what we call philosophy, philo, love, Sophia, wisdom, that deals with the nature of knowledge, the nature of knowing. And there's different types of knowing, and not all those knowings use the same method, which is one of the main fallacies when it comes to these things. You'll have people who use the word scientific or whatever, but they're equivocating. And when it's just like, there's lots of stuff that you know that are not quote unquote scientific in the ways that you may characterize as science, even in what you, even how you even characterize a particular field, where just such as not all experiences are reproducible. Not all experiences need to be predicted. They're trusted and they're fulfilled with some modifications, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of stuff that's like, if you actually pay attention to how you actually live and how your mind actually works, most of your life is not this scientific blah, blah, blah that people actually talk about in a cartoonish way. That's the actual fiction, which is, that's kind of what's funny. But if you actually pay attention to how you actually work in real time and day to day and throughout, there's a lot more texture. There's a lot more dynamism. There's a lot more richness. And there are way more different types of knowing, different methods, different makeshift methods at that. There are methods for the moment even, and methods and strategies that even add up and aggregate or long term. So you get mosaics and you even get synergies, methods that come together to make an overall stronger method to achieve maybe a product. And that product may itself may be something you maintain or you optimize or that you use or you have to integrate, and that ends up changing your life, on and on it goes. There's way more to this. Basically, this is just life. And I really much I'm talking this way because I want to attack the frame of communication, the frame of engagement that does not actually engage well. It just confuses being able to talk smart for actually being smart, and confuses being smart for actually being wise. These are not the same. So like, yeah. So that's the background. Somebody claimed MBTI is fiction. I'm saying actually, that's actually a really good approach, because if you say an MBTI type is like a fictional character, that you end up seeing your similarities and you can use them as a reference point to kind of pinpoint certain features about you that aligns or deviates from this type within this particular work, within this particular fictional work or model or system, and so on. And, and from there you kind of are able to navigate people. You kind of get this like map that's not as rich as the territory. And you are able to get like this way of navigating a tapestry of a person, since we're always a lot more complex than the strands we can be able to draw out concerning ourselves that other people can draw out about ourselves. And then on top of that, this is a dynamic tapestry at that. So yeah, just wanted to say that. So that's all the background information right now for this current moment of the video, and an extension and expansion of what I said in the previous video. And my approach to this, I'm attacking the frame, I'm attacking the overall structure and saying, approach it completely differently. And let's see whatever novelties come from this. And I think Antonia and Joel will appreciate this being any DOMs, since it's novelty, and there's also a feature of greater depth involved, of course. And I do value all the other functions, and I want them to have their play, but want them to have their play as they actually are, which is, you could put it as like my SE bent, if you want to put it like that, where it's like I actually like to pay attention to how people actually live, how they experience, not just how they get used to talking about stuff and how they used to like forming thoughts to express them, because most of the time those are distortions and they're not accurate. So yeah, let's continue.
Exactly. Yep. It's very common to
see, even she agrees. She should exactly
have Myers-Briggs be vilified everywhere. And this is relevant because, I mean, at the time of this recording, people are going to be visiting family and friends for holidays. And if you're a person who's into typology systems, whether it's Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or whatever, and you start talking about something that's interesting to you, or, somebody says, so what have you been up to? And you talk about how you're getting into the system and, like this is something that's interesting to you. And then you're met with this weird vitriol, this this like aggressive pushback on a hobby of yours. I mean, people don't just say things like, oh, I'm not into that. They'll like get almost like they're angry that you're into it.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon. So I thought today.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, like I said in the previous video, I haven't exactly had that experience, but I can see that happening. Or rather, it's not, well, I'll say it happens. It does happen. I'm not sure about the frequency, but I'm aware of the intensity. I'm aware of like you could say the sense of emphasis you can give to this when it does happen, or when people share these things, especially when it comes to such a, I guess, this exploration and this topic and manner of communication that's not popularized, if you want to put it like that. It's, or rather, yeah, I'll put it like that. It's not popularized because there's certain things that are popular because of majority exposure, and there are certain things that are popular because they're promoted as popular, they're promoted as valuable. But this is not popular in the sense of like it's not presented as valuable. It's what people can come to find valuable, usually in a shadow way, usually through like 16 types or something. But on its own, it's generally depreciated by those who want to present themselves as sophisticated when honestly they're really not. And yeah, you'll see. Hopefully, as this goes on, I'll probably end up elaborating more on that. But there's lots of false sophistication. Lots of people who have knowledge but no wisdom. Lots of people who know how to talk smart and say things like, "Oh, science, facts, and figures," and all this other stuff and all this other stuff. But it's like when you actually explore or interrogate them, it's like you don't have much understanding. You don't know the limits of these. You don't even know the horizons of these, and you may dismiss something as not being scientific due to like being outside of a particular method. But that's because you're not that ingenious with the method to be able to figure out what you can figure out when it comes to the theory or even the system or the model that's communicated to you. So it's actually an expression of your own limitation, not of the system or model that you don't actually want to explore, mainly because you don't know how to explore and you're just kind of just doing a mental shortcut because you're mentally lazy. But hey, I'm kind of harsh when I critique. So yeah, but it's true.
We could talk a little bit about why does Myers-Briggs get so much hate?
Yeah. I do think, are we going to talk today about both of the types of hate it gets? One I think is personal. The other one is, I would call it constructed. So I led with the constructed hate. It's like people that don't know what they're talking about look at the system and they're criticizing a system because they think there's some unscientific elements and all this, right?
Or whatever. Yeah.
But there's also a personal criticism in that, well, I don't want you to, for example, personally profile me. You're going to put me in a box or you're going to tell me who I am. And I feel like that's unfair. And I'm more than just a label or whatever. I mean, I think that criticism dips in, but those are a little bit of two different. One is not necessarily saying I hate the system altogether because it's been proven wrong. The other one is more like, I don't know what this is going to mean for me, so I push against it.
Or I had somebody who was into that and that made me mad.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's
yeah, that is very interesting because somebody's like, oh, it's been proven wrong. The thing is, the person who says this, I guarantee they don't know how to explain the falsification methods and why these falsification methods are actually legitimate. I guarantee they could not articulate that at all. If you ask them, okay, how was it falsified? Well, because blah, blah, blah. And they'd be like, okay, is it claiming to be that? What do you mean? Like, I guarantee they did not take the next level investigation. They did not go another layer. They did not do any higher order thinking for any of this. They just kind of like are just piggybacking off of what other people say and then they're piggybacking off of what other people think they do when they figure things out that they don't actually do. And yeah, just lots of sloppiness, honestly. Most of the time people get by on serendipity, not actual competence. So the structural critique is just, or the structural critique, the constructive critique is just usually dumb and not well done. And even if the people critiquing this, they don't even actually know how to improve it. They just want to dismiss it, because here's the thing: if you have a bad theory, just make it better. You know what I mean? It's like there's a way to like kind of do this well, relative to what it is you're expecting, or what makes what you're expecting when it comes to a good theory, when it comes to a good system, a good model, on and on it goes. So if you're not even going to figure out how to improve it, your critique is just kind of like, okay. Because, well, and even while I'm saying this, you might be like, well, why don't you just, it's like, no, I can lay out for like, oh, you can try this. I have like different Google Docs, not just conversations with ChatGPT to organize my thoughts, but even because I've been exploring the nature of typology systems and all these different things. And that's why I was able to piggyback off the whole like fictional character approach of like, yeah, a type is basically a fictional character. But to write even a fictional character, you need an understanding of human beings. And that way of understanding human beings gives you it requires certain knowledge. And that way, the way of gaining that knowledge is not as like linear and quote unquote a matter of empirical inquiry with reproducibility within parameters and extending certain patterns and principles that are continuous with all of this stuff. It's like, no, like that's not exactly how most people work. And that's not even how you understand yourself or how you understand other people. Even the people you consider keen psychologists or psychologically keen don't approach things that way either. So it's goofy. In fact, you can translate that in that way, but it'll always just be just another way of seeing. It's like how mathematics, physics, and engineering can converge, but they are their own separate domains. Engineering being the practical, we could say, co-constructing with the creation, and physics being trying to understand the latent principles of how the creation works and so on, and being able to formulate these into either mathematical language or even linguistic constructs, because I don't know why people treat physics as if it's only mathematics. You literally communicate physics a lot through language too. And in fact, it was just only math. It will never be communicated publicly. And also you can represent it through other experiences and mediums and so on. And even how lots of physics conclusions are arrived at are through not just merely mathematics, but through like different thought experiments, phenomenological engagement, like in real time, lots of stuff like that, examinations. So yeah, then mathematics, you could call that the physics of the mind itself, or, they call that the language of patterns. Once that's put into a stable notation, a standardized notation that people can use cross-culturally and so on. Those are ways you can engage. But each of these can converge, but they are their own distinctive domains. So likewise, with like these topics, when it comes to figuring out a human being, there are different domains that you can access, such as what are the patterns of human beings, and what are the latencies in terms of how we experience human beings, and how we can even extract and communicate these patterns and through different mediums, from like symbols or language, or different like rigorous systems and so on. And then from there, you can even go further into like what are the practical uses, practical outcomes, practical encapsulations, where you can get prototypes. You can also standardize engagements and so on. In fact, in many ways, that's what a type is. A type of, whenever you formulate a type, you're actually getting an engineering construct, if you really think about it, because a type allows you to practically interface with a person, like based on how this person works. As far as I understand, how people can work with the math, the underlying patterns and like the latencies, how this person unfolds in terms of like, laws and dynamics and so on. They are expressing this way. And even if they seem to be doing similar things, this person, it's because of this very reason. So it's not purely empirical, if you want to put it that way. And in fact, I actually have an analogy that I think Joel and Antonia will very much appreciate about why this orientation towards empiricism as the basis for knowing is incredibly foolish, because empiricism never fully fixes us in one common frame. You think of people standing in line and somebody at a desk. The person from you could say, extroverted thinking perspective will say standing in the line is procedurally effective and efficient. It's linear, allows everyone to get checked off, on and on it goes. Person with like FE would say, it's good that we're standing in line. This allows us to preserve harmony. It's fair to everyone. Everyone's like, yeah, I get to go when I go, and you get to go when you go, and we're all cool. See, same empirical situation, completely different decryption, completely different, even organization of information, the completely different hierarchy of relevance, and completely different communication even. and stuff resulting from this, but it's the same empirical situation. These two same people can stand and see and experience pretty much the same material. Hell, even the same person. I'm the one who just gave you this analogy because I can actually shift different frames within the same situation. So you can shift cognitive functions if you want to put it like that. You can shift modes, manners of attention, manners of communication with the same empirical situation. So to just simply say, well, it's just empirics and just measuring, it's goofy. It's goofy. You're interpreting. Even that itself is a frame. That's an interpretation that you're giving everyone as a standard, as a default, as the priority. But it's not the only one. And it's not, and it need not be universal, and it's not comprehensively useful either. And we know that. Because depending on who you have to communicate to, or when a problem comes up, you'll use different ways of engaging the same situation, different ways of communicating about the same situation to give new insights, to give new, what people will call, I guess, perspectives. But I kind of hate that word because it's kind of vague and a bit mystical at times and too visually based at times. But I guess I'll just use like perspective, angle, and so on. So yeah, y'all get the point. Point is, most a lot of these critiques are dumb. And last thing I'm going to say on the personal of like, oh, you're labeling me, you're putting me in a box. It's like the best this actually does is shows you the kind of box that you are in some feature, because the mind is the only box you can't think outside of. Literally, no one can put you in a box. Honestly, you're as free as you let yourself to be. You're free as you allow yourself to be. You're as free as you seek to be and align with life and what allows you to be source-wise in principle. And shout to Yeshua, for whom the sun sets free is free indeed. So yeah, this whole like, you're putting me in a box, you're labeling me. It's like, actually, your problem isn't being put in a box or being labeled. Your problem is you thinking it's inaccurate due to either it being aiming to be comprehensive when it's not, or it expressing or capturing a feature of you that's either unfavorable, if true, or is just outright false. So fundamentally, you actually don't mind labels or quote unquote boxes. You just want them to be true and useful to you, and maybe not put you in a bad light or whatever. So that's usually what's going on. So we all kind of do this. We all label each other. Oh, you're so authentic. You're so smart. Oh, blah, blah, blah. These are all labels. These are all, you can say, boxes. These are all, or rather, I'll put it as characterizations. Or maybe you can put it in terms like a cell wall. Or better yet, I prefer to think of like an open floor plan, where when you categorize, you're not actually putting a wall between stuff. You're kind of like letting the living room and the kitchen be open and continuous space. You can transition between either, but there are things you're more likely to do in a kitchen than a living room. And so when you talk about an oven, you're like, oh, this is a kitchen. When you talk about a couch, you say a living room. Even if there's no box, there's no actual separation between them, you can actually make an operative attentional distinction. And that sounds very technical, but it's like, it's very obvious. We all do this. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is very easy to navigate if you just pay attention to how you actually experience, how you actually talk, how you actually work, not merely how you react and how you get used to how people talk to you and how you've inherited to talk about stuff. So yeah, let's be real. We're only 3 minutes and 50 seconds in, and I already said so much, but it's just, these things are very dense and there's lots of stuff to express here. And that's actually why I wanted to watch this video, because they hit on so much here and it'd be wonderful to talk to them. So yeah, let's enjoy, y'all.
I think what we're going to talk about today will probably answer both styles, but I think it's worthy to. I think it's a worthwhile distinction that some people have a more, like you said, constructed, almost like they're supposed to hate the system, especially if they've come up through academia, which we'll talk about in just a moment.
Yeah.
And then there is the personal, like they're taking it personally. This is something that has been created to, offend them as an individual. I think that there are those two ways that people show up. And if a person is giving you pushback, it's probably worth your time to figure out which of those two they're leaning towards.
So how do we look at the way Myers-Briggs has been vilified? Mm-hmm. Like, how did we even get to this point?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if we have to go back over the history of Myers-Briggs or what, but how do we tune into the fact that a lot of people push back on this system altogether? So how do we look at this?
So I thought we'd go through a little bit of what are the quarters that reject the system? Why is it getting the pushback it's getting? Where does that coming from? Is it, because there's something to the criticism, and so this is something that should get a lot of pushback, or is it more like there might be other reasons why there's so much vilification and vitriol?
I wanted my degree in computer science while still being able to raise my kids.
Maybe I should get YouTube Premium or something. Well, I can skip, so.
Just, like the human heart on a mic.
And then I thought we'd also talk a little bit about how postmodernism is sneaking in here as well, and how it's reacting to a bit of modernism. And then also how people don't really understand what Myers-Briggs is in general and why their misunderstanding might be creating a lot of this challenge.
This is simple. We just have to go through the entire history etymology of why the system has pushback. What was the second thing you said?
Modernism and postmodernism.
We're going to explain the difference between modernism and postmodernism. And then we're going to tie it all together by the end of the episode.
And discuss how other people... We're going to do everybody's thought labor for them.
I suspect this is going to be like a 6-hour episode by the time we're done. We're going to handle all of this.
I don't think so.
Based on all that, I'm teasing, but we're not going to be able to go into... we're not going to be able to solve postmodernism versus modernism today or land that in an academic way. You're going to have to do some study on your own.
We won't solve all the mysteries of the world in this one episode, but I do want to also... I think there's further conversation around this as well.
Sure.
And we'll talk a little bit about what is the darling of academia when it comes to personality systems. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a future episode. We'll discuss whether or not academics' darling is as valuable as they think it is in contrast to Myers-Briggs. And then I think we should also touch on at some point in the future this idea that there's a reason why it won't die. And what's that reason? Why is it such a valuable system?
All right. So let's jump in.
Okay. All right. So how did Myers-Briggs become vilified? Why is it something that's getting so much pushback? And I think it starts, unsurprisingly, with academic rejection. So the system itself was developed, the origin of the system it has its roots in Carl Jung, and particularly the book Psychological Types, in chapter 10, where he talks about what we now know are the 8 cognitive functions. So that's the book Psychological Types, all of the archetypes of the self that are discussed in that book, some of the challenges that he saw in, his, subjects and those who were coming in for analysis that were dealing with challenges and problems, psychological challenges and problems. In fact, the word "the problem of" or the phrase "the problem of" is in many of the chapter titles in the book Psychological Types. And then he discusses these 8 cognitive functions or ways of seeing reality that are pre-wired cognitive preferences that everybody has, sort of an alignment towards.
Yeah.
And this work got picked up by a mother-daughter duo named Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers. And they were fascinated by Carl Jung's works. Now, since they were the ones that developed the system, I tend to believe them when they self-diagnose their types. But Catherine Briggs self-diagnosed as having INFJ preferences, and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers self-identified as having INFP preferences. And so they were both highly intuitive women who were not necessarily academically trained back in the 30s and 40s, where it was not common for women to go to college, have formal academic training like we do now in psychology, right? Psychology itself was a bit of a early embryonic field.
Well, by this point, it's a good old boy.
I wanted to kind of let them unfold some of that. But the whole academic training thing, sometimes I think people act as if they walk into a middle of a movie, and how that middle of the movie is how it's always worked, when it's everything always starts out, you could say, with amateurs or even autodidacts, people who teach themselves. So there's always an origin to every single field, every single topic, and then you could say starts out as a prototype, and then it evolves, and then it becomes standardized or gains some sort of communal, I guess, use or communal communication or communal interest even. So once you get that feature, then you kind of get things being driven by consensus, not even legitimacy or even illegitimacy. So certain things become, this is illegitimate because blah, blah, blah. This group of people who consider themselves the elites say no. And then if you examine, okay, what's the basis? It's they don't actually really have much of a basis. The arguments usually are just garbage. Or this is legitimate because of blah, blah, blah. And it's why, and it's like, oh, the argument's also garbage. So that's the problem with a lot of these stupid dismissals, where it's just like, okay, what are the ideas? What are the methods? What are the limitations? And what are the horizons? And once you get that, now you can critique legitimacy. But till you actually do that, you don't really know what you're talking about. Honestly, if you don't know how to approach this, it just becomes just a whole set of just different ways of dismissing stuff without actually being valid. Like not a lot of people have like valid dismissals of these things, to be honest, these different topics. And it's not to say they are true or false, but prior to even like figuring out what is true or false or useful and so on, without actually inspecting and testing and examining and stuff, you won't know. And I would also want to say, like, academic training is just, it's like if you figure out the training, you yourself, you could train with other people. You know what I mean? Like if you figure out the methods of such and such a person, or even like think of it like as cooking, like a chef. If you figure out the recipe and how they cook what they do, you can test it out and experiment, and you can expand it. You can figure out limitations. You can make new recipes, on and on it goes. That's actually what's supposed to happen in academia when it's done well. But sometimes it's not quality, it's just quantity and just kind of status seeking. Because, at the end of the day, this is just done by human beings, which is where you should just approach these things, where it's just like, it's human beings doing these things. Even if we make these distinctions and give certain people like the social status of academic, it's like foundationally, it's like, what are the criterias and the methods that make up the engagement? And if other people can learn them, then they understand and how to keep a pulse on quality. And if there's a novelty with criteria and method, then you also can examine that too, and then see, is this criteria and this method apt for the goals being aimed at? And you could say this is a very like extroverted thinking way of communicating, but it's like, yeah, in a sense, yeah, because it's like you'll know them by their fruits. So if I have this method because I'm trying to achieve this goal, did I achieve my goal? If I have this criteria for being able to determine if I achieve my goal, did I achieve my goal? So you investigate on their terms. And if I have these ideas that are present as such and they're intelligible to me, I understand them, then there are certain communications and engagements that unfold from this. So that's basically what the academic world just had to do with this stuff. And, somebody can easily just start making like a critique of like, oh, it's because there are women, sexism and all such. It's just, which is true. That does play a role. But the fact that even unfolds that way is itself a testament to this just being human, that human beings are prone to stupidity, using mental shortcuts to try to determine legitimacy instead of evaluating what's given on its own merit, irrespective to whether they were women or not women, or even children. If they give quality, it's quality. If they present what is true, it's true. If they present what is useful, it's useful. So you examine them on their own merit. But if you just simply say, well, you're not in this particular area with these particular people, then that's dumb. Because now it's like all of a sudden understanding becomes provincial, or becomes a local thing, instead of it just being like, oh, if you have a mind and you have the resources and you have the methods and so on, you can investigate and come to certain understandings. That's kind of how all knowledge has worked before it became standardized. So people have just inherited tradition, and now they treat it as if it's like kind of like just, oh, this is how it is, and blah blah blah. It's like, no, it's I don't know. It's a goofiness of like forgetting you were born and that you grew up and you gained skilled, and then you became how you are right now. So that's a tendency that people are prone to. So even with this topic, this is happening here. So yeah. So that was just a long elaboration of just how this whole approach to these women, like their great work, their great effort, and so on, is really dumb and annoying. And in fact, I actually have an MBTI book with the different information, all this other stuff that I'll maybe go through in detail little by little through a live, and we'll explore and think it through and stuff, because I like making how systems form and how theories form and models form transparent, and how we experience transparent, because I'm very interested in phenomenology, how we experience, and very interested in cognitive science in terms of how do you map out how we experience, and then how do you communicate this, and then how this unfolds as a civilizational project or even a form of life if you don't have like these complex structures and systems, ecologically speaking, or materially speaking, going from you know, the use of certain patterns and symbols and building certain structures with engineering and so on and blah blah blah. So yeah, let us continue. Yeah.
Boys Club.
And
Right. I mean, it's a
right.
man's world in
Yes.
psychology in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s.
Yes, exactly.
There's that famous scene in Mad Men when Don Draper sends his wife in for therapy or to see a psychologist.
Right.
And as soon as the session ends, he calls and tells like Don Draper all the details of his wife's. I mean, it was like the men were running everything. And if women came up with something, there's a lot of sexism that's going to be baked in the opposition to this from the very beginning.
Yeah.
From the very beginning.
Well, and I kind of think that
it's a man's world, but I also put it as, I guess, when it comes to men, even if they structurally and qualitatively dismiss other men the same way, because the distinction isn't being made on the basis of their maleness or whatever, it doesn't get called what it is. It's just stupid. It's just stupidity. So it's like that's the interesting thing about these times, at least in America. Sometimes people will be like, "Oh, because of sexism and racism." It's like, no, it's just human beings being dumb. Like people dismiss each other of the same sex. People dismiss each other of the same race with the same mental shortcuts, with the same idiotic perceptions, with the same arguments. It's just dumb. It's just being stupid. But because you notice this difference that they're maybe hitting on or referencing, you latch on to that as like a way of recognizing how this stupid way of working happens. But it's just general. It's just stupidity in general. Like if Myers-Briggs were developed and it was just like in a society of women or whatever, and there were like women academics who were like, well, we as academics see blah blah blah, you know, so like you wouldn't be able to like reference the whole sexism or even like a man's world either. You would just simply be like, well, this is this type of person's world. Oh, like these academics, they're all brown, they're brunettes or whatever, or you know, it just gets goofy. You just find because what you're looking for is just a way to like frame people and recognize them on the basis of some sort of appearance or disposition. In fact, what's interesting is like there's always an implicit psychology that's still characterizing what happens with these things and stuff. And sometimes it's intersex, sometimes it's intrasex, and even with this, it's not necessarily like it's like akin to the open floor metaphor that I gave, where it's like, oh, there's certain, you could say illegitimate arguments and dismissals that happen more with this type of person for this type of reason, that are akin to like you do certain things in the kitchen and not in the living room. So that's basically what it becomes. But it's not usually like just like, oh, it's just and blah blah blah. It's like generally it's just, that's why I just usually just start from a basis of like, is this legit or not? You know, is this general human stupidity? Because there are certain things that are just like, well, you could say, let me put it this way. They could have made arguments like, oh, as women, y'all made this theory this way and you express this thing due to what's typically associated or even typically a skill or even a weakness of women, whatever you want to put it. And that could be legit. But they may not completely invalidate the overall project. So that's why, even if in part unto itself that argument would be legit, structurally it's illegitimate. You see, so this is actually a lot more of a difficult conversation with these topics, and that's what makes these topics sometimes weird, where it's like whether sexism, racism, whatever it is, it's like, yeah, I can be sexist and still tell the truth. I can be racist and still tell the truth about a person, you know. Oh, I can be sexist to women and still say things that are false about men that are negative. I can be sexist to women and say things that are true about women that are positive. So it's like that's not usually a really good focus. Just focus on legitimacy, focus on what is true and what is good. And that kind of like cuts through a lot of the noise and nonsense and actually allows the people who are dismissed on the basis of their race or sex or whatever category to actually be able to express their true quality. Because now what they present is a matter of quality. It has nothing to do with you're dismissing me because of blah, blah, blah. It's like I can dismiss you because of blah, blah, blah. And blah, blah, blah can still be legit or illegitimate. So it's just like, at some point, you just have to address what the person presented. So what did these women present? They presented this. Now address that. Yeah. Sorry, that's very like elaborate. But overall, it's just a smarter approach to stuff. That's wiser. Anything else is just really dumb. By the way, my pun says, my shirt says, my puns are quality. My girlfriend gave me that. I love puns. Anyway, let's continue. Okay.
there might be a little bit of it still lingering there.
Yeah.
Because this idea that they couldn't have possibly come up with anything interesting because they were not formally trained in psychology. They were just housewives.
Yeah.
Which I would not have reduced either of them to being merely housewives. But even if they were housewives, that doesn't mean that they're unqualified to figure out patterns and see deeper, being autodidactical means that they could have been self-taught, and especially in a time period where much of these burgeoning fields were around being self-taught. So
yeah, but
I find,
in fact, if you actually pay attention, if you think about it, people who didn't have to like do a lot of heavy labor continuously are the people most likely to come up with good ideas because they have the most time to research and think and so on. That's why a lot of like ideas in European history, philosophically speaking and scientifically speaking, usually comes from wealthy white guys who just like, hey, I don't have to do a bunch of stuff. People can do it for me. And now I can have the leisure of being able to read and think and all this stuff, like Kierkegaard, who basically inherited a bunch of money from his dad. And now he can use that education that he got when he was younger to just keep reading and writing and spend most of his life just doing that. So, in fact, they're actually in the best position to be able to follow the tradition of people who are wealthy enough to just be able to sit down and just think and reflect and experiment and converse with people and study people and observe them, and on it goes. In fact, you can almost argue they were novelists, fiction writers, very keen, aka Virginia Woolf, stuff like that. Like these women who are just like very like sharp and observant, who just try to study the human mind, how does consciousness work? How does this person think? Okay, based on this conversation, like they just store a bunch of stuff about people, so much stuff about you. Though, like you'll interact with them and you won't realize all the stuff that they observed and how they go back and they write in their journals and all this other stuff, and then they organize it into a story. Then they tell the story, and you read the story, like, this story is great. It's like, what did they have to do to get that information? You see what I mean? Come on. The same skills that goes into crafting a very brilliant novel goes into these kind of systems. So these women are very much capable. They're very much capable. And in fact, they're in the optimal position to actually figure these things out. In many ways, you can even if you want to argue, they're in a sexist position, you could say because people already may underrate them, it allows them to actually get more information about people, because people, you can see, reveal themselves more raw to them because they underestimate them. They can't tell how much they're able to actually lock in and figure things out about them and store about them and so on. So it's like the argument of like sometimes people trying to like underestimate you, that underestimation is actually what ends up helping you and empowering you, because it's like now because they're underestimating you, they don't realize how much they're always revealing to you, and you can store that and you become a keen psychologist. So yeah, chef's kiss. I love these ironies, and it kind of is very much continuous with how even God gives wisdom, where it's just like giving it to, like keeping it from the learned and the wise and gives it to like children and the simple and the women, people who are just kind of like looked down upon, where it's just like, yeah, of course they'll get it because they're usually humble and they can, or if they're excluded, can kind of gain like a new angle, like an outsider's angle and stuff, and notice stuff in a novel way that other people may dismiss. So hey, go ahead. And no, I'm not trying to pander. I'm just trying to hit on stuff. But yeah, I do very much value women, and quality women, because when I say women, it's just a bit of an abstraction, but I value quality women of character, nobility, skill, competence, all of that. Like Antonia. So yeah, glory be to God.
That criticism, which is usually the first criticism that comes up, I find it to be something that should be reevaluated.
So the high priests of the academic circles didn't put it into their holy books.
Yeah.
And so now it's not in academia as specially approved of by the high priests in that like religious order.
Why would
That's actually the best way to communicate it. That's how a lot of stuff becomes, because we never leave what we call religious thinking, religious structures, and whatever. We just shift it over. It's kind of like if you got rid of an institution in the government, all those functions of those institutions will just shift to another institution, or maybe a new institution will pop up that ends up doing that institution's functions in part or whole, but it just has a different title, because you could say there's a type of conservation of function, conservation of manners of attention, modes, blah blah blah, modes of activation when it comes to human beings. So there's always if you want to put it as like, there's always religiosity. Human beings are always quote unquote religious, and they will kind of talk out of both sides of their mouths. So if you're not very exacting in what you think and how you communicate and in how you experience and so on, you'll just be contradictory. Honestly, you'll just perform contradictions where you'll express things religiously while thinking you're not being religious, and you'll dismiss things with religious forms of mining or argumentation, or that may be found in such even but you'll think you're being quote unquote empirically rigorous with inquiry and methods and parameters that allow reproducibility and eventually allows you to get mere utility. That's you can standardize whatever, what people usually think of when what usually people think of when they cartoonishly use the word science, which is not completely how it works, but hey, go figure. So yeah, let's continue.
Why would you pick up a tool that's made by a couple broads, right? What value could that have? So I think that's generally considered the first major criticism, and I think that should be reevaluated.
Yeah.
The second is that very quickly after the time period of Freud and Jung,
Introducing Remarkable Paper Pro.
Yeah. Psychology is very interesting because there's always a psychology behind every wisdom-seeking engagement, every knowledge-seeking engagement. It's always just latent, and it kind of like it's kind of akin to like how you have eyeballs before you see. So it's not until like you actually start examining your eye, and you're like, oh, so this is what was there to let me see, like a hawk or like an octopus or a human being or whatever. So there's always a psychology. It's not until you study it and you're like, oh, so this is what drives me to express and experience how I do and communicate to those I communicate, and on it goes. And that's what I value about this model and theory, because that's something I was very much looking for, because it's something I was tracking with people and being like, oh, there's a way in which we work, and even different wisdoms, their gaining transforms you, or your lack of them makes you inaccessible, or rather makes those who do possess it inaccessible to you. So as a result, it allows there to be a lack of harmony or communication, because there's no bridge to recognize like there is a difference and stuff like that. So very interesting stuff. But yeah.
Psychology entered a modernist frame, which was very common mid-century last year. And effectively what that meant is during a time period where, everything was about like what was the military industrial complex,
and everything it was the measurability of things.
That's right.
Everything had to be measured and managed.
Yes, exactly. Modernism was very much about measuring things and making sure that things were replicable.
Yeah, industrialization very much did a number on what people standardize as the priority when it comes to knowing, the most reliable source of knowing, and the types of knowledge to be sought, and so on, even though there's all sorts of knowledge and knowings that they actually default to, and all sorts of methods they actually default to in their day-to-day. So industrialization, and you can even see how that, some of that stems from British culture, British positivism, which I guess I'm making an association that this is kind of why Nietzsche would critique these things the way he did, and kind of why he was at times very harsh with certain stuff. But anyway, I'm also thinking of like positivism, pragmatism, all these different philosophies, and how like they're very much continuous with this particular culture, and then the emergence of industrialization, and how like a whole culture's form of life, a whole civilizational unfolding ends up driving how people seek to even study human beings. It drives how people communicate, how human beings are. So every process to even understand this itself gives more insight into how human beings can show up and how human beings can make a showing. So that's basically what a lot of this comes down to. If you think about it, a lot of these arguments, these whole discussions is just like my soul saying, my soul says your soul is wrong, your soul is right, your soul is like this, your soul is like that, and blah, blah, blah. And your soul says my soul, blah, 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 and like that. So it's just, it's communication. How do we characterize each other? How do we judge each other? On and on it goes and stuff. Because if you just keep going further and further, it's just like different psychologies, just expressing different ologies, different orders, different characterizations of the logos, trying to express the soul of a person, and their health, their sickness, and their virtues and their vices, and their strengths and weaknesses, and so on. And how this may, if you think of it in terms like signal processing, you can enhance or dampen or dilute or fragment or alter, subtract or add to different people's communication of their psychology to you, and your psychology to them. And then you can form different civilizations, groups implicitly, that is, there will be like certain blah 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 that's never articulated, it's never explicit. You're not even aware it's there. It's just kind of like water that you swim in as a fish. And then there's certain things that will be explicit that people usually try to default to for the sake of maintenance or status or or even like trying to get certain things done, or even describing how they do things, even if it doesn't actually describe what they do, or they actually do more stuff, or they actually do less stuff, whatever it is. It's one of those interesting features of experience, understanding, and pragmatism, behavior easily fragmenting or altering each other or influencing each other. It's very fascinating. Yeah.
And the reason why I refer to the military industrial complex is and there's been a lot of criticism about modern day, institutionalized schooling, because it was set up during a time period where everybody wanted that, they wanted to churn out a bunch of little scientists and engineers and people that would continue America, particularly America at this time, but sort of the West's dominance and its ability to fight wars with, rival communist countries and that sort of thing.
Well said. Well, great distillation. So I'm glad that, tracking just even how the psychology, the social priorities themselves come from a time period where there are certain goals and even certain requirements or certain desires. And these have been inherited and carried on. And this is why people are just like, STEM, yeah, and that's why you get like how people gesture status. Because I put it as like, just like people, people please, they also intellectually please. There's always this gesturing for status of like, I'm smart, right? I'm smart, right? I'm smart, right? So I'm talking how smart people talk. Oh, I reference facts and figures and blah, 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 and this, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, you'll notice that like there's ways in which people will always try to get this sense of status or gesture status where it's like, oh, well, I'm very commonsensical and rounded or whatever. Oh, I'm very blah, 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 blah. It's just like everyone will tell you how it is they want you to characterize them as wise, how they want you to characterize them as valuable, and so on. And there's that feature there, and it's very fascinating because it's like, yeah, to the point that even like what people call like America's anti-intellectualism, or I'll call it I'll put it as just lack of a wisdom tradition. That's at base what it is. It's just not valuing wisdom, not even knowing what wisdom is. So as a result, you'll have people who, I guess if I do a parallel to Nietzsche's critiques of his culture, or even Hegel, they're like walking encyclopedias. They have a lot of knowledge, but not much understanding. There are people who can just tell you like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, keep in mind, this does not mean that knowledge is accurate, or even like they'll communicate the knowledge as it is, or even from the actual source, but they'll just have a lot of stuff stored, but they don't have much understanding. They're not even aware of what they don't understand. They're ignorant of even their ignorance, and so there's a way in which they'll default to certain frameworks, and they'll say things like, oh, well, what I think or what I believe or blah, blah, blah. Like they'll treat everything like as if it's instrumental and personal, I guess, possession. They'll say things like, well, such and such works for me, but it's like, there's lots of stuff that just works and it has nothing to do with you. But if you don't understand why it works and how it works, you don't know when it will fail. So you're kind of dealing with like a ticking time bomb. You're like a person who's like, well, my car drives, but then it turns out you don't know how cars work and you can't fix your car. You don't know how cars are built. And you don't know even if the cars can be built better, or if the person who fixed your car damages, so you come back and you'll pay them more money. You see what I mean? Just things like that. Like there are all sorts of social implications that come from not having wisdom, from not valuing wisdom, and only focusing on something halfway working for you, or just working enough for you, and that's all you need to get by. And so you'll be superficial in your understanding and in your thinking, and it just hurts you overall in the long term, and it hurts you at a deeper level, and allows you to be exploited and cheated and pretend you know stuff that you don't actually know. And yeah, it's just in many ways, it's actually due to the fact that you're so wealthy. You have the luxury of actually having a bunch of information you don't actually understand well, you don't actually know how to use well, and you have the luxury of being able to be ignorant when it comes to wisdom and not value wisdom. Basically, you're protected enough to be a fool, if you want to put it that way. You're like a child who grows up in a comfortable house, who, because your parents are wealthy and they take care of stuff, you still go around trying to like stick a fork in a light socket, doing all sorts of stupid stuff, and the consequences don't usually hit you as immediately or as quickly as someone who's poor and directly engaged with certain harsh features of life, without you being so it's basically you just have a lot of social bailing out, social cushioning. and infrastructural cushioning and infrastructural bailing out. But then this kind of shifts the stress to other areas too. Then you start complaining about different problems and critiquing different things that are actually caused by the very luxuries that you depend on, and the very like cushions that you depend on due to you not valuing wisdom and wanting to deeply understand and truly seek what is true, what is valuable, wisdom. So yeah. Apparently. Okay. All right, let's continue. What's interesting is this whole measuring thing. You could, if you approach it phenomenologically, you can actually try to note the continuity of mind through embodiment. Note the continuity of mind through embodiment when it comes to communication, expression. Like, oh, how fast is this person talking? What's their breathing? What's their diction? Even just on a linguistic basis in real time. Or how does this person move? Like, do they seem like attentive to their environment, or do they seem like they're in their head? Okay, when they're stepping, they're like when they're wearing slippers. I tend to watch people's feet a lot often when I'm at work, and some people when they're wearing slippers, you can tell who's grounded and who's not based on how they step. So there's things like that. There's a way in which you can actually try to find some sort of continuity between mind and behavior, and then you can even like verify that by checking through investigation directly and indirectly, and even different situations and so on. There's actually a really good way to do psychology within and without, if you're ingenious enough. So this whole orientation towards, well, in metrics and measure, it's like the people who even talk about metrics and whatever, they don't actually understand metrics that well, which is kind of ironic. They don't measure metrics, if you think about it. So as a result, they don't actually know how to make the best use of them. They only know how to make a particular use of them, and then they standardize that use of metrics. So even that is kind of dumb. It's just like a grief. The people who try to suggest a course of action themselves are limited with that course of action. So, and mainly because, so it's just one of those things. So yeah, we'll figure. I was about to make a Ted Kaczynski thing, because Ted Kaczynski in critique industrial society for becoming overly complex and unsustainable, which is true, because lots of stuff becomes about luxury and kind of you get like this whole inflation of novel problems and inflation of like luxuries, and that create new problems, and on it goes. And you don't track how like novelties have to be integrated into, if you could put it like a tradition, and that process is difficult and will create new novel ways of addressing how this integration process unfolds. So you'll actually get new problems, and you'll get new solutions and new communications, and sometimes there's even a lag. And then keep in mind that human beings, we're not prone to understanding things well, and also we have a learning curve. So then you end up with the difficulty of like excessive complexity, excessive problems, excessive novelties, on it goes, that don't actually allow you to gain clarity on what's going on. So yeah, that's also another tangent on the whole industrialization, metrics, and how, I guess I'm trying to say, this critique of Myers-Briggs is itself a structural critique. It's a symptom. It's a fingerprint of the kind of culture that we're in, that does not value wisdom, and it does not value be about metrics. Says our connection is unstable. Okay, it tries to be about metrics, but it's not very embodied. It's not very grounded either. So as a result, it doesn't even describe what's actually happening when we use metrics. It doesn't actually describe what we actually do and what we don't do. So as a result, it's just a lot of abstract delusion and standardized, I guess, information, standardized ways of communication, but no keen understanding. And once you start interrogating it and ask people to express, then you realize like, wow, you're incredibly frame locked and you're not that perceptive. And it's very frustrating. And you get a lot of illegitimate arguments and so on. And I guarantee you, once this video is posted, or if somebody could come here like, well, so like somebody will actually say stuff as if, well, probably because they literally can't process what I just said. And they'll just be like, hey, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead. Those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. Glory be to the Logos. Indeed. Replication of traits, predictive behavior, and so on. The stuff that we do in real time, the stuff that actually requires a lot of real time textured attention to people and to yourself to actually do very well. So you, by nature, it's not something you can just fix within parameters and then artificially generate over and over again, since a lot of life is situational and it flows and it's faceted and on it goes. You get these layers, you get these strands, and on it goes. So yes, you can get like certain through lines, you can get certain principles of organization when it comes to these things, and you'll even get certain transcendental categories where certain you'll get different durations. But overall, this expectation, or rather, you can put it as like the goal becomes looking for fixed universals. That's one of the goals of a certain way of knowing that they want. I want something that's does not change, that's universal. But this is not true to life, because life is full of particulars, or rather universals that express in particular situations, or as particulars, if you want to put it that way. And there are all sorts of different stuff like that. And even like the notion of seeking what is fixed, it's like it's a matter of characterization. So there's a lack of discernment even with this too. So yeah, it's just a very big topic that's just, it's really not done well. There has to, I really argue there's just like Nietzsche wanted there to be a trans evaluation of values, or re-evaluation rather, but I very much argue there should be a communication, recategorization, rejudging, not just reevaluation, so on. Just like examine and then go through carefully, and let's see. That's because it's tracking how people work, and people are not exactly predictable. They will have habits, and situations will be set up habitually, but life is dynamic, and there's changeability, and that feature of like, if you think of yourself as like a car that can drive itself, you can glitch up, you can malfunction, you can crash into other cars. Roads may afford certain ways of driving. There may not be roads, but maybe you may make a path, and so on and on it goes. There are all sorts of different ways stuff expresses. So it's like, what are you tracking? How are you tracking? You basically have to kind of make a map of what it is you're engaging, and not just merely aim at prediction. And even with prediction, there's like different types of prediction. There's prediction that sets like horizon, like, oh, I'm looking at the horizon of the ocean, and I know what usually is in water and can sail in water will come to me. There's prediction that sets a target, like I'm setting this target within this environment, assuming this stability. And despite me shifting around in that environment, I know the target is here, and so this is how I can hit it. This is what I expect can hit it if it's going like this relative to blah blah blah. Yeah. So, and then there's prediction that's kind of like a filter. This is what I can cut away. This is what's not relevant, and what is valuable here. So all those, there are different manners of predicting too. So even that's not usually characterized. It's just sometimes just trying to get a pulse so you can manipulate. There's always a feature of, I want to predict so I can manipulate. If you put it that way, in many ways, that's usually the goal. Anyone who's always aiming at prediction and metrics, they want to be able to control. They want to be able to make stuff happen. But unfortunately, you don't control all of life, and you don't fully control yourself, and you don't fully control other people. So naturally, if you say knowledge is what I can control, which is a stupid argument, then you don't have knowledge. You won't get an understanding, because most of your understanding, most of your knowledge is not controlled. It's actually you learning how much is not in your control, how much is actually in God's control, and you give him the glory, and you stop trying to lean on your own limited understanding and trying to play God and stuff like that, and goofily patting yourself in the back and throwing around ways of talking with other people that you all kind of shake hands and call each other smart. It's dumb. But yeah. Yeah. I like that. The American dream, the promise of we can all have luxury. We can all have the highest status. We're equal and we can all become of equal levels, but it's like there's still mobility, which implies there has to be inequality so people can kind of be able to shift and get that sense of achievement in the first place. So there's lots of tensions and paradoxes with this country, but hey, go figure. What's going on? Anyway, I guess I was thinking. Well, I guess I was going to comment on this psychologically, not just materially, because even psychologically, even have this sense where people have this sense like, oh, I fell behind in life, compared to who set up the race? Wait, who set up like the story? Like, what's the story? Like, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. Sometimes you even have people like will recite this like standard story that most environments don't even have. They're like, you're supposed to get the white picket fence and blah blah. It's like, do people have like, do everyone live in an environment where they need a fence or get a fence, or do people, or do you even want a fence? Like maybe I want my neighbors to be able to visit and sit in front of my front porch, things like that. So it's just like this interesting standardization of a form of life, or this kind of like people being given inclinations and desires that may not necessarily be innate or even actually be desirable. It's just kind of like a story that we tell, or even we'll tell stories about stories we're told, or we'll kind of tell a story of like we've heard a story, but we'll confuse maybe how available the story is in our minds, and blah blah blah, and that's very fascinating. Apparently, it says your connection's unstable. So anyway, let's continue. But I just thought that was very interesting because I do notice that feature, but it's more like in terms of you want to put it like in the cult of genius or celebrity or whatever when it comes to like the kind of goals I had for myself, because I tend to have more interior goals, not material goals, because I don't really care for material status. So I can very much do relate to that, and I can see how that is a feature of American culture that I actually took on. But even going further, even prior to American culture, I also see that it's very human, that generally if people are exposed to a level of luxury, or they get like a baseline of higher luxury or higher goals or higher desires and on the goals, whether they're quality or not, even just advertised as quality, then they will pursue that. They'll see that as like, that's what's worthwhile, and so on. And if they fall short, especially if they have a sense of entitlement, or maybe they're striving, or maybe they're narrated a story that, oh, you're because of blah blah blah, or such and such people, or blah blah blah, that's why you're not getting this, then resentment builds up, and maybe through that they'll either want to end the game or restructure the game or blah blah blah. And so you kind of get like how capitalism and socialism, if you think about it, are very two sides of the same coin. So lots of these ideologies very much work that way, where they end up just being responses to problems that come from people trying to maintain or getting a certain form of life, or being driven by, I guess, basic human drives, if you want to put it that way, from just not valuing what is most important, not valuing what is true, and kind of falling for what's subpar, and trying to extend a ladder to a fake heaven that also extends to a hell that you try to climb out of by trying to build another ladder, and on it goes, and it just gets really goofy, and you get all this complexity and stupidity. But just a quick diagnosis from what he said there, because it's very interesting, because I was diagnosing myself, and I was like, yes, I'm a symptom of this culture in many ways. A lot of my problems are actually due to this. Fascinating. Thank you, Joel. Beautiful. Okay. Which is interesting, because if you really think about it, there are lots of stuff in physics and biology that are actually not measurable. They're just like here. They're literally just in your head. Like I put it, is like, you could, if you think of things in terms of chemistry and physics, there's like, you could call that the latent realm. The realm there, you just kind of like, you'll project patterns and structures you picked up with your embodiment, even sensory organizations, sensory characterizations, and then you kind of compose it in an abstract way and you map it, quote unquote, downwards. See, even there, we're using spatial language. We're mapping it down, or we're going deeper, or we're going narrow. We're breaking stuff down. You see what I mean? Like, we're taking what we engage with our body at this level to a level that we don't actually experience at. So this idea of measuring is sometimes interesting because sometimes there's like different scaffolds of measurements, different scaffolds of inferences. You measure even the measuring process itself, and you create like different, I guess, mediaries, or like kind of Rube Goldberg like ways of trying to, like, I guess, extract or figure things out indirectly, or figure out like the effects of what it is you can't observe on other stuff that you can observe, based on your characterization of what you can observe. Just things like that. There's lots of, you could put it as like you kind of code, or you program in ideas, you program in forces, you program in agencies, and so on. And then you see what results when you interact with the world that way, when you communicate about the world this way, and so on, and what you build given these ideas, and so on, and what that allows, and on this unfolds. So this idea of measurability, blah, 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 being comprehensive is dumb. It's not fully true, because you only measure because you have the mind. Foundationally, it's just here first, with the body, and so on. Then the metrics that the body makes is suitable and is even made in a way in tune with the particular minds we have, with the kind of bodies that we have. You see, so even metrics are just extensions of our bodies, extensions of our minds. So, and they're usually like a one-dimensional, they're a limited form of this at that. And it's not till like you realize they're limited that you can kind of like flesh it out and dimension it out more, and get like you're just kind of just making, it's the difference between doing geometry versus farming, which is where, geometry was, metrics. So the farming is always a lot richer than the actual geometry, but you can get the geometry and you can use it to like do cool stuff with the farming, but overall the farming will always be more. And you yourself, as a person making geometry, will always be capable of doing more. So that's the problem with just treating everything as like it's just pure metrics, and when it's just like, it's just metrics are good, but you need discernment, you need understanding. That should be the aim. And so you need an understanding of metrics, their strengths and weaknesses, and so on, and how they actually inform your investigation. They're akin to like when you engage the world visually, you characterize visually, and you will even use visual ways of communicating, visual metaphors and visual categories of understanding, and so on, versus like listening, or even tactile, or proprioception, or vestibular, or interoceptive, or even like a synesthesia of like these, and so on, or even trying to generate alternative senses, and so on, by trying to figure out shared features of senses you never had access to. So things like that. So that's actually more true to life. That's more true to how we actually work. So please, let's work that way, and please, let's talk that way. Let's stop with this goofiness. Like, there's way more going on, and it's not till like people actually start tapping into this and working this way that all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, Einstein, oh wow, Richard, all these different people. It's just like, yeah, because the world is already laid out for you. God has already laid out this rich world with all this treasure of wisdom and knowledge to be dug out, and then it brings him glory. So yeah, let's keep going. Glory be to God. So that's also the thing too. In fact, if anything, I will argue we have to stop using the word science, because science means knowledge, and there are different types of knowledge, because we've called this empirical inquiry with parameters for the sake of prediction and figuring out principles that you can extend as continuous with this way of engaging the world and this way of communicating, this way of using your mind. People think all knowledge foundationally is this, and all knowledge is only reliable when it's this, which is foolish. It's not true. It's demonstrably false. And you might be like, well, give me a sign. It's like, see, here's the thing. You don't use science, quote unquote. You don't use the scientific method to justify the scientific method. You use a different form of inquiry, a different form of minding. You use different argumentation, and on it goes. And so on. So it's just, a lot of this stuff is just this issue of just like looking for universal permanence, fixedness. You can almost put it as like we're looking for gods, if you want to put it like that. Because in this case, you impersonalize the gods, and you personalize them, and by tapping into them, you can try to manipulate this and control the creation and make it do what you want. Or sometimes you'll actually come in contact with these gods, well, demons and stuff, and weird stuff will happen. But That's for communities who are aware of that. So those who know, those who don't, hey, go figure. Maybe you just kind of just give me a particular story where you conserve all to your limited experiences and how you're used to talking about stuff, which is not comprehensive by nature. So yeah. See, notice what he said, insecure. How much of this is emotionally motivated? There's not just social stuff, which is foolish. If anything, make that transparent, make that aware, make people clear on that. Like, yes, all right, my fellow scientists, my fellow knowledge seekers of this particular method and this way of orienting and communicating, I want status. I want you guys to eventually declare me a genius. I do not want you guys to think I'm stupid and incompetent. Yes, people, let's all admit what we're trying to do. Let's all admit what we value. Yes, I want to be seen as an explorer. I want to be seen as, like, clever. Yes, blah, blah, blah. Please, I want this status. I want a sense of self-worth. I want you to love me and value me. Well, like me, because I confuse that for being loved. On and on it goes. You know, like, once you make that transparent, it's like, oh, wow. And because of that, I'm telling you, sometimes I may falsify information, or I may not understand things well, because I am human at the end of the day. I'm only human after all. So just imagine a knowledge seeker who talks like that, who actually admits that about themselves. I'll admit that about myself. I'm aware. But I don't want that to interfere. I want to get rid of that because a lot of that is just idiotic and stupid. And there are better ways to actually get what it is I'm truly seeking, and I get it fulfilled in Yeshua HaMashiach. So anyway, yes, insecurity, envy, resentment, jealousy. Oh man, the anxiety of influence, the anxiety of, oh, is somebody going to steal my data? Is somebody going to steal this idea I had? Oh, I want to present it to the public. So they'll be like, wow, this person's so brilliant. Or maybe I have this like vision of like the species and for the glory of science, or blah, 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 you know, like this weird, abstract, impersonal, blah, 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 you know, like it gets really goofy real fast. But once you start making it transparent, like, oh, this is just human beings doing human being stuff wisely and foolishly, you know. But when it's not made clear, you get a bunch of goofiness and you get a bunch of just smart people just trying to be smarter, but they can't because they're not very self-aware and they don't know what they're doing and they just can't be honest about the kind of creatures that they are and what it is they do. So yeah, I feel like I sound like Nietzsche, but this is what Nietzsche would try to do. But except sometimes he took more of like I wouldn't say a cynical bent. It's just kind of like you can almost put it like a negativist bent, because you could say he was trying to compensate for the fact that people sometimes try to frame things positively or in a way that makes them look better than they actually are. So yeah, hey, go figure. Let's enjoy. Which is kind of ironic because the Big Five is actually not objective at all. In fact, that's a really bad way to measure stuff if you use methods. It's just, oh, report to me this. Like, that's just, you just basically told me what I just told you. You just collect a bunch of aggregated reports, which is like, okay, but if you think about it, it's just kind of like a community, it's like a community discussion, but a very like watered down community discussion of just like, hey, everyone just blah, blah, blah. Tell me what you think, blah, blah, blah. Or tell me this and blah, blah, blah. Then you kind of like store that. It's like, that's not, it's like, you could actually like you'd have to actually be a lot more thorough and textured and frame stuff and then put qualifiers around stuff like that to actually get a sense like you're actually rigorously doing stuff. Be more rigorous with this stuff. This is lazy. It's actually lazy. It's very lazy. And like how I'm saying it, it's like sounds simplistic or like sounds like a simplification, but it's just like, yeah, because you're not actually doing the best you can. There's actually more stuff you actually can know. There are ways to know. Just be more ingenious about this. But it's just like, well, I'm being empirical because people answered a questionnaire and because I'm investigating outside my own head. Therefore, that's dumb. Anyone can do that. That's not even a good method. In fact, examine that method. What are you actually aiming for? What's the goal in doing this? Does it actually guarantee the goal? No. Are there better ways to achieve the goal? Yes. Why did not come up with those better ways? Come on. Interrogate the basics, people. Come on, interrogate the basics. Enough with this whole like, well, I use the word objective and I use the word, it's goofy. It's so goofy. It's goofy. I have friends like this. I know lots of people like this. I listen to conversations like this, and you hear people talking. It's like, it's just human goofiness. There's nothing happening here. There's no rigor here. You're not trying hard enough. You're not working hard enough. You're not doing as much as you can. It's lazy. But because you have a bunch of people who also think they're smart too for doing the same lazy thing that you do, and they tell you you're smart, you do it too, and you think you're smart. And it just like becomes, I'm smart because other people say I'm smart, and they're smart because I say they're smart, and they're smart because other people say they're smart, and on it goes. It's like everyone's saying they're smart. It's like, okay, let's actually do something smart. What's the goal? Is there a better way to achieve it? And on it goes. And then you're like, now this is actually smart. And now there's a wisdom that's actually characterizing our operation. Glory be to God. Sorry, my manner of communicating this is not good because I've become very intense and just there's like a playful like mockery and frustration with these things because just lack of rigor, honestly. It's not to say you can't get these things wrong, but it's just like there's so much more that can be done. There's so much more that's not being done. I can almost put it as like you almost have to, from each of these fields of investigations, the best you can do is start it off as an amateur, where it's like I'm experimenting, I'm exploring, I'm expanding, and so on. But once it becomes standardized, everyone kind of like this defaults to the tradition. It sounds like Bruce Lee, but like it's true. It's just like you're no longer living the skill. You're not even aware of the skill. You're like, let's put it as like you default to a way of seeing compared to like a painter or sculptor or an engineer who has a more skilled way of seeing a face. So you can draw a face based off of like your traditional way of seeing a face in your community. But then when you meet a painter or a sculptor, an engineer, they'll draw a face or point things out about faces that you're drawing. It's like, yeah, that theory, that model, that method, approach and stuff. Here are its limitations and here are its potentials. On and on it goes. And you're like, oh, wow. And it's not till like you're aware that you have a default way of seeing that you actually grow to be able to actually see well. Because you're aware you see in a certain way. Now you can actually see for the first time. And that's also what I love about the MBTI, because it's not till like you're aware, like, oh, there's a way in which I actually tend to talk and use my mind and on it goes. And now you can actually do it better. That's the beauty of the optimization that comes from these kind of psychological systems. And that's one of, you could say, the goals of psychology, the goals of self-knowledge. The more you understand yourself and the more you understand how you understand, the more you're able to improve yourself in your practice, in your expression, and on it goes. And it's what I'm seeking when it comes to the wisdom of Yeshua and him transforming me and renewing my mind and transforming my heart and all these different emotional stuff and like, healing and blah, 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 and trying to orient in the loving and peaceful way. That's my original goal when it came to truth seeking. So yeah, let's continue. Yeah. What's interesting is you could say this is the operation of thinking, and that's actually what happens when it comes to metrics. Metrics actually aim to do that, but it does it in a way that feels outside of our heads. It does it in a way where you get a standardization. So there's always a tokenization with any metrical approach. So this way of communicating, this theorizing, this structuring itself has to tokenize, if you want to put it that way, or rather has to like create sort of like fixed portraits or somewhat fixed notions so you can grab them and use them. Because if you're touching something that's always shifting, quote unquote, metaphorically speaking, states of matter, going from solid to gas, and then whatever, it's like you can't do things with it. You can't build anything with it. You can't give it to other people. So it creates this instability. So I guess in some ways it's kind of to be expected that this will happen. And if anything, it should be built in, described that this is the tendency that will happen. That, generally our minds want to take the stuff in a way that's solid and useful. But it's like, it's just not always true to life and how we actually fully experience, because things are a lot more dynamically constructive, if you want to put it like that. So, yes, you'll get traditions and so on, but things are a lot more rich. So yeah, I very much understand your critique, and I get why people even have that sense, but It's just kind of like you just have to understand what it's doing and what it can't do, and then whatever you do with it, that's you doing that with it. You know what I mean? So yeah. Which is funny because the archetypes themselves do the same thing, because they're different, quote unquote, you could say archetypes or even variations on an archetype. And even if you can even go deeper into archetypes, into spiritual archetypes, what allows these archetypes to form the way that they do. So Jung could actually take it deeper and actually realize that he himself was prone to doing this very thing that he critiqued. He just only valued it at the particular level that he took it to when he found his, you could say, quote unquote, universal archetypes, this type of Platonic forms. So, well, I guess I'm making more of an analogy. Yeah, but it's not. So it's just one of those things. It's just one of those curiosities. I have lots of stuff I've been thinking about concerning Jung, but who knows? Maybe I'll be able to say it here if it's relevant. Because I know I do like to go on tangents because I like to give lots of information. Because something will be said, I'm like, I have this network connected to this particular node, so I can say all this around here, as far as the focus goes and stuff. Even though I sound like I may be all over the place, I'm actually not. I'm quite focused. Everything tends to be quite structured, and they're like different circuits and like different brain areas, if you want to put it like that. Like, oh, here it does this, but they can communicate with each other, and so on. And then if I do make them communicate intentionally, it's for the sake of creativity. But most of the times, just like, this is where this is stored, and this is what this does. And then other times, just like, oh, you can do this. So yeah. Another way to say that is I'm not doing any. People tend to experience me as doing expert intuition because like, wow, he knows so much and he goes through so many different things. His mind is so fast. I'm like, yeah, but I don't actually deal with like generating a bunch of ideas and possibilities. My mind actually does not work like that at all. If anything, I just have like a vast memory, if you want to put it like that. But generally, I like to converge and go as deep as I can to stuff. And overall, I prefer to actually experience my ideas. I like what Bruce Lee, I listened to this AI Bruce Lee, where he put is like, I like to experience ideas, if you want to put it like that, and then maybe turn it into like symbols or language. And that's actually what I spend a lot of my life doing with my vocabulary and stuff, always looking for words, languages, and ideas to try to capture states of mind, experiences I encounter in the world, things I observe about people, all sorts of stuff. So once I'm able to communicate it and I gain that feature, then people are just like, wow, because you can communicate so well and you can make so many ideas, you must generate a lot of ideas. You're so unfamiliar, which is what usually people mean by abstract, because there's a continuity between abstraction and concretion as far as those metaphors go. And yes, concretion is a metaphor. So ironically, concretion is abstraction, and even perception is an abstraction. So yeah, see, I'm challenging categories already. I'm already challenging frameworks because that's what I tend to do, because I want to know how things actually work, which includes, and when I say I don't mean like things are even fixed, sometimes there's just variations to a working, which itself has to be acknowledged as it is. So that's the frustration sometimes with people. I'm curious. Yeah, that happened with archetypes too. I mean, look how often they occur in stories. The idea of the hero's journey, which has become like the standard, or you could say story, even though they're different life stories or different journeys. Not even positive necessarily, even negative. So and that's why I prefer the Bible, because it's more true to how human beings actually work. You get these different variations of different types of people, strengths and weaknesses, and so on. And even though they're like almost like vignettes or snapshots, like these moments when you expand them, there's so much packed in. So I prefer this version because it's more true to life, and you can actually find how this expresses different ways people live and so on. So Jung himself was a tokenizer. He just thought he reached some fundamentals and universals, and that's where he tokenized at. And so he just, maybe you could say, he just critiqued what he saw he was prone to doing at a level that he didn't think was appropriate for, which is fine, because sometimes different, what you'd critique in some areas, fine in other areas. What you critique at some levels is fine at other levels. What you'd critique a child for doing is not what you'd critique an adult for doing, and vice versa. But in terms of like praise, like it's good, it's okay as a kid. So like, oh, it's so cute, like, and like you're asking certain questions and you're saying certain things when adults like, well, you should know better than to just say that or to do that. You know what I mean? So yeah, go figure. Yeah, I mean you could say that's a tendency of, I mean, everything of corporate America and even industrialization, the tendency towards complexification. As you complexify the world, you simplify the mind. If you think about it, that's how it works. Because as things become more complex, your mind has to become more simple. But as you dive more in depth into the richness of the world and so on, your mind becomes more complex. And you'll notice as things become more complex, people pay less attention to their lives and less attention to each other, and on it goes. And so their minds actually become more simple and prone to simplifications. And then they will confuse actual simple expressions that are just dense and rich or actually require more exploration for you overcomplicating. Because it's as if they've forgotten you do realize this world is complex, and most of what you actually process is first and foremost through complexity. Then you simplify, you make it accessible to yourself, and then you're able to convey it to other people. And then that may become standardized, even if it's of low quality. So it's just one of those things where it's just like, yeah, it's just one of those things I tend to notice very often. So it's very much expected that this would happen. Hell, eventually you might even, I don't know how much you can water down, but it's expected as things become more complex, things get more simple. So see, that's me simplifying that, but that's actually a really good simplification. It's very clear because you know this, you're aware of that. Think about it. Whenever you think of things are very complex, you actually get by, okay, let me simplify this. What's the easiest way I can go with this? What's the first thing I can do? Okay, what's the easiest way to describe this? Blah, blah, blah. You just want to make a decision. And you could say, so typically in MBTI, NTJs and STPs are good at that. Even though people sometimes people make claims for both or whatever, I'm actually constantly simplifying. That's the irony. I'm actually aware of way more complexity. I'm actually constantly in a state of simplification, constantly. But you won't be aware of that till you're aware of the vast complexity that you're actually enmeshed in, the vast complexity that you can actually take in, vast complexity that you can explore. There's actually way too much, so I actually have to simplify. But it's also that I'm a very verbal person, when it comes to certain things like that. When it comes to people, because I wanted to become a verbal person, because it was also actually ironically one of my weaknesses. So people were just like, wow, you talk a lot and all this stuff. It's like, that's actually something I've struggled with for most of my life, especially childhood going on. I didn't think like, how the hell do I communicate this? And because I put it as like feeling like Tarzan, who just became very good at talking. As I could probably describe it. It's like in that process, I was trying to find new ways to talk about stuff, new ways to communicate stuff, and getting into literature and all this other stuff also expanded and broaden my exploration and range of communication. So yeah, that's enough about me. Let's continue. But I just think that's a high any user. Well, obviously what's blatant is high TI intuition, or I've been typed as an INTJ, depending on blah, blah, blah. When it's just like, no, I know INTJs. My sister's an INTJ. I'm not an INTJ. In fact, in some ways I wish I was, but in some ways I'm very much am not. And I have my own delusions that are subject or specific to the kind of type that I am, because different types have different delusions. And you could say I tend to have STP delusions more often than not. And then even NFJ. So if anything, as an intuitive, I'd be more of an INFJ. That's easier to identify with than